Hi guys, Mrs. Burry here. Hey, we're gonna do day 7, and it's a lot like the last lesson that you had. But in the last lesson, they gave you the amplitude and the frequency or period in the midline in the text in a sentence. And the only thing we're doing different today is that you're gonna have to go find those pieces of information from the graph. So let's go ahead and so this should be repetitive for the most part, and the part that's new is getting your own information from the graph. So let's go ahead and try it. So our equations have the form y equals a sine bx plus d, or y equals a cosine bx plus d. The d value is the midline, matches that d there. The A part, which is the beginning, the A and the A, that's the amplitude, the distance from the midline to the top or the midline to the bottom. And B, the part that's inside the parentheses with the X, is the frequency. There's two things that can happen to that. You can either figure out the frequency, which is the number of complete cycles from 0 to 2 pi. Sometimes you can just count it. Other times, it's difficult, and you're going to have to find the period to get the frequency. Remember, the period is the distance in the x-axis it takes for one complete cycle. There's one more piece of information that you're going to need. You're going to need to know, is it sine or is it cosine? So let's review, okay? This is the y-axis, and this is the midline of the graph, okay? If it starts on the midline and goes up and down and makes an S shape, this is a positive sine graph. Okay? The next kind of graph, to recognize it, there's the midline and the y-axis. If it starts on the midline and goes down, up, and back down like that, that's a negative sine graph. Right? Oops, sorry, I bumped that. Another graph is the positive cosine graph. So this is the y-axis and this is the midline. A positive cosine graph makes that cup shape. So it starts up high and makes kind of a cup, okay? And it ends where it started. And the last thing you can probably guess is the negative cosine. So this represents the y-axis and this is the midline. And a negative cosine starts at its low point and the cup is just upside down. That's a negative cosine graph, okay? The positive and negative go out front with the A, but either way, those are the four shapes. So everything in this bubble up here is what you need to know to do these graphs, okay? Let's go ahead and do the first example. Write the equation of this particular trig graph. We always start by marking off the top line and the bottom line. Here's the top line, and here's the bottom line. And I enclose that wavy graph, okay? Now, I got to count the squares from the bottom to the top. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. Half of 4 is 2, so I go up 2 from the bottom. 1, 2. That is my midline. A little crooked there in the middle. And it is a line of y value. Y equals, what is the y value right here? It's negative 2. So, y equals negative 2 is the equation of the midline, and that negative 2 is my d value in the equation. The next thing I need to calculate is what is the amplitude. The amplitude is you start somewhere on the midline, I'm going to start here, and you say, what's the distance from the midline to the top? Midline to the bottom should be the same. Count the squares. 1, 2. It's 2 squares to the top. 1, 2, it's 2 squares to the bottom. That 2 is my amplitude, or A value. The next thing I need to know on the graph, is it a sine or is it a cosine curve? So we have to go to the y-axis and say, where does the graph start on the y-axis? Here is where it starts, okay? It starts on its top line. So it starts on the top line, or its maximum value, and then it goes down, okay? If I compare what starts on its top value and goes down to these curves up here that I wrote in the notes, it's going to look like this cosine graph here. It starts at its top value and goes down. So it's a positive cosine, Okay, that's another piece of information that you will need. All right, the last piece of information that you'll need is the frequency. So the frequency is defined as how many complete cycles happen between 0 and 2 pi. So here's 0, and we go across here and try to find 2 pi. Here's 2 pi. All right, how many complete cosine curves do I get from 0 to 2 pi? Well, let's trace them out. It's a cup shape. Okay, so I have one cycle from 0 to 2 pi. I have the complete cup shape, okay, from 0 to 2 pi. So that means my b value is 1. Let's put that all together now into the equation. So we start with y equals, and we said this was a positive cosine, so it's going to be a positive cosine, and I left space, okay? Now, the amplitude value, or a value, goes in this spot. A is 2, okay? And then in parentheses, we put the b value, which is 1, with the x, and then I put the d value at the end. Okay, just to put that all in color for you here, this is the d value. The red came from the positive and the cosine in my notes up above. The a value was purple, and the 1 is pink, and the x just stays with it. Okay, so that's where I got everything in the graph. Okay, cosine x plus d. Now, looking at what my final answer would be, this right here. I would have to type that in. When you type this into Delta Math, you must type in the parentheses when you type it in, okay? Use the parentheses around this 1x. It may require you to type the 1 in. It may want you to leave it blank. You know how we don't always write the 1 in front of things. So either way, let's go ahead. And actually, if you want to make a little note to yourself, I wrote the letter 1 or number 1 here. That should be the letter B. So that's a B there. Okay? All right, let's do another example. All right, here's our next example. Write the equation of this trig graph. First things first, we always draw the top line and the bottom line in. So there's the encloses the tops. This encloses the bottoms. Count the squares from bottom to top. 1, 2. Half of that is 1, so go up 1. And this is my midline, or halfway between. It has the equation y equals, what is my y value? It is a positive 1. So y equals 1, and that's going to be my d value. All right, the next thing I need to do is locate my amplitude. So the amplitude counts from the center line to the top, that's 1 square. Center line to the bottom, that's 1 square. They'll always be the same. That's my amplitude. The next thing I need to do is identify, is this graph sine or cosine? Let's take a look. On the y-axis, its starting point is here, okay? And it goes up. So it starts at the midline. When it starts at the midline, it is a sine graph, okay? If we compared that, this one starts on the midline and goes up, okay? Starts on the midline and goes up. So it's a sine graph, and it's a positive sine graph. Okay, that's another piece of information we need. The next piece of information we need is the frequency. So I'm going to have to determine how many cycles of a sine graph occur between 0 and 2 pi. First thing I want to do on my x-axis, here is the 0. Where is the 2 pi? Here is the 2 pi. Okay, a sine is that S shape, remember? So it starts here, and it has to go up, past the middle, and come back down, and completes that S shape. That is one complete sine cycle. So for the frequency, from 0 to 2 pi, We have one cycle. So my B value is 1. Let's put that all together in the equation. So y equals, the first thing is first, it was a positive graph. The a comes next, that's 1. It's a sign, that comes next. In the parentheses, b is 1, and the x stays with the b. And then the last thing out here is the d value, and that is a positive 1. Okay? So that is our trig equation for this graph. Let's simplify it. We could write it like that, or we could simply say, we don't always write the 1 in the front. We could just say sine of x plus 1. And these parentheses are very important. Okay? You have to use the parentheses around the x value there. All right, here's another one. This one's going to have another level to it, so you want to pay close attention to this one. All right, we're going to start the same. Draw in your top line. Draw in your bottom line. What is halfway between those? Well, it's 2 squares to the top. Half of 2 is 1, so I think we could divide that right there. Okay, that is our midline. It has the equation y equals, what is the y value? It's -3. That's our d value. The next thing we need is our amplitude. Our amplitude goes from the midline to the top, that's 1 square, and midline to the bottom, that's 1 square, so our amplitude is 1. Now, what kind of graph are we dealing with? Sine or cosine? Looking at the y-axis, this starts on the midline and goes up. Okay, just like the last one, it is a positive sine curve. Right? So it starts at the midline and goes up, so it's going to make that S shape. Okay? Let's see. Our frequency is the next thing we need to do. And how many complete cycles from 0 to 2 pi? Well, let's look at our x-axis here. Here's 0. And we're going to go out here. And it doesn't go far enough. The place I have to stop here is pi. So I'm going to say 0 to pi. Whatever I get for this, I'm going to have to expand it to get 0 to 2 pi. Okay? So we'll have to do a thinking part in here. So let's see what's going on from 0 to pi. All right, sine curve starts here, and it's going to end where it started, and it ends here. So see how that and that line up? And this is one full wavy curve of the sine graph. And it stops in a funny place right here at 2 pi over 3. So I don't have a really good indicator of how many sine curves is there between 0 and 1 pi. Here's what I can do to adjust, okay? So the frequency is not easy to calculate this way. What I'm going to do is use the period. So this is the new thing and the hardest thing that we'll be doing with these. So a period is the x distance for one cycle. Okay, that's the definition of the period. All right, so let's go find the x distance for one cycle of sine. So I highlighted one full S curve, and it stops here. This is the x value of that ending of the first cycle. So the x distance for one complete sine cycle for the period, or capital P, would be 2 pi over 3. So I know that the period of the graph is 2 pi over 3. What I can do to calculate the frequency, because the frequency is the thing we're really looking for, is if I go back here to my front page of notes, I said the frequency can be calculated, that B value can be calculated doing 2 pi divided by the period, okay? So to get my B value here, I'm going to take 2 pi and I'm going to divide it by the period that I got here, which is 2 pi over 3. And now I have a fraction inside my fraction, okay? How do I deal with that? In the numerator, I'm going to make it a fraction by putting the whole thing over 1. I'm going to keep, change, flip. So my b value, I'm going to keep the numerator, write it out as its own fraction, 2 pi over 1. I'm going to change from division fraction to multiplication, and I'm going to flip the denominator. So instead of 2 pi over 3, I'm going to have 3 on top and 2 pi on the bottom. This makes it easier to work with these because I'm multiplying two fractions. I can cancel things out, so 2 pi and 2 pi are the same, so they cancel out as 1. When you multiply two fractions, you multiply across the numerator and you multiply across the denominator. 1 times 3 is 3. That's our numerator. 1 times 1 is 1. So our b value is just 3 for that. Okay, so see how we didn't use our normal frequency calculation? We started out in that and it became too difficult. So we went over to the period, and it's this little process here to get the b value for the equation. Let's put all of this together for the equation now. Okay, so we have y equals, we said it was positive. The next thing that comes is a. Our a value was 1. After that becomes, is it sine or cosine? It's sine. Parentheses, our b value, we said down here b was 3. X, close your parentheses, and the last thing I write is the d value, minus 3. Okay, I can simplify this up in one way. I don't have to write the plus 1 out front. So this would just be sine 3x minus 3. Parentheses are very important in here. This would be your final answer. All right, let's do another. These are not easy. Might take a couple of tries. All right, let's do this one together, and then I'll have you try one on your own. Write the equation of this graph. If you wanted to pause the video and try this on your own, then watch it, that would be fine if you're ready. But let's go, I'm going to go ahead and do it. So there's my top line, and there's my bottom line. First step to all of these. I need to find the middle between that top line and bottom line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares. Half of 6 is 3. 1, 2, 3. So it's going to be right here on the x-axis. So my midline has the equation y equals, that has a y value of 0. That is my d value. The next thing is my amplitude. My amplitude goes 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So my a value is 3. The next thing I have to calculate is this a sine graph or a cosine graph? Let's look at where it starts on the y-axis. It starts at its max, or the top, okay? It starts at its max and it goes down. So you can always go back to that first page of notes. Everything's open notes. What starts at the top and goes down? That's the plus cosine graph. So we know this is a plus cosine graph. All right. Now, cosine is a cup shape. Let's highlight one complete cup of cosine. All right. So it starts and it stops here. One complete cup. All right. So we're going to go back to our definition of frequency. And frequency, remember, says how many complete cycles between 0 and 2 pi. We're going to have to find 2 pi on the x-axis. We don't have enough graph. There are a couple of ways to proceed here, but I like using calculate the period method and then find b from that. So let's find our period of this graph. Okay, period is, what is the x distance for one complete cycle? So one complete cycle of the cosine cup ends here, and if I end that, it ends at pi over 2. I know that's hard to see on the video, but I looked at the x-axis and I got this pi over 2 value for the ending of one complete cycle. The period is pi over 2. To get the b value, I take 2 pi and divide by that period value, pi over 2. Okay? And now I have a fraction mess here. So I'm going to do keep, change, flip. So the numerator, I'm going to put over 1. Keep that, 2 pi over 1 all stretched out. Instead of the division bar or the fraction, I'm going to multiply here. And then the denominator, I flip that. So that would be 2 over pi. All right. Now, what can cancel out? Looks like pi is here and pi is here, so they each cancel out to 1. When you multiply two fractions together, you multiply the numerator. 2 times 2, that's 4. Multiply the denominator. 1 times 1, that's 1. So b is 4 over 1, or b can just be 4. So that's the b value that we're going to use into our equation. Let's put all of these pieces together into our equation now. Okay, so we start off with y equals, or f of x, whatever it asks you for. Is it positive or negative? We said it was positive. The next thing comes your a value. That's 3. After that, is it cosine or sine? This is cosine. After the word cosine, you're going to use a parenthesis, and then it's bx. So that's going to be 4x. And what is your d value? That's 0. So we could write plus 0. Now, we could simplify this. I don't think that Delta Math is going to want you to type this plus 0, so let's just write it without that. And without the plus. 3 cosine 4x would be your final answer. All right. There's one more here. I encourage you to pause the video, try this on your own. I'm going to go ahead and continue. So when you come back from your pause, you should be able to check your work. All right, I hope you had some luck with that. First thing we do, draw our top line, draw our bottom line. Halfway between, that would be y equals 3. Next thing, amplitude, 1, 1. So my a value is 1. Is this sine or is this cosine? This starts at the midline and goes up, so it is a positive sign. I checked it with the first page of notes. The last thing I need to do is figure out the frequency. From 0, 2 pi is here. How much of the cosine or the sine graph do I get from 0 to 2 pi? It looks like this one's going to be fairly easy because it starts and finishes there. So that means I have one complete cycle from 0 to 2 pi. So my b value is 1. For the equation, y equals, the sign is plus, the amplitude is 1, the trig equation is sine, parentheses, b, 1, x, always put the x in there. That's like the number one thing to forget is that x in there. And then plus 3 for the d value. Taking out some of the not necessary stuff, sine of x plus 3. That would be the equation that you would type into Delta Math. So the only thing new today on all of this is that you have to go to the graph and find the pieces of information. I hope the video was helpful. Your homework assignment is going to be Delta Math. And I wish you luck with that. Please message me if you have any problems. I'd be glad to set up a video conference with you to help you get it figured out. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.